So I would like another time to thank you, Gerd, for your time and for this presentation. And Gerd is a friend a long time ago when I stayed several times in Michigan State University. So for me, I am very happy that he stayed in this very important position in Zurich. So today they would try to discuss the educational development and technology at ETH Zurich. So please, Gerd, you can start your presentation.
Yes, hello Elio. Thank you for inviting me. I very much appreciate this chance here to present. I wish I could be with you in Brazil, but the current global situation just doesn't allow for that. I always loved visiting at Sao Paulo, so I hope that in the future there's a chance to be there in reality. For now, though, just hello from Zurich. It's in the afternoon here. So thank you for making the meeting possible at your morning so that I can that it's still a normal time. So what I would like to do today is talk about what happened here at ETH Zurich when Corona hit us. I'm calling this teaching in emergency mode, because for us at least that was an emergency. None of us had expected this to happen, and then within 1 week we essentially had to completely change the way that the university operates for us. So I wanted to start out with an overview. I first wanted to give you a little bit of background on ETH Zurich. Then I would like to talk about what it was like to switch to emergency mode for us. I would like to talk about some of the tools that we used, then early formative evaluation by the students of how this worked for them. Then I'm going to talk about exams. Then I'd like to quickly talk about an evaluation by the faculty that we just completed. Then the plans for the fall semester, which is still not going to be normal. And then long-term perspectives or kind of lessons drawn from this. And then I hope that that would seamlessly go into a discussion. So ETH Zurich is one of the 2 federal universities in Switzerland. It's a technical university. The specialty here is science, math, and engineering. In German, it's a Technische Hochschule. So a technical university. We have 21,000 students, of which the majority are bachelor. 9,500 are bachelor students, and there are 6,600 master students, Master of Science. We also have 700 Master of Business Administration students, and we got 4,200 PhD students at this institution. And there's a total of about 10,000 faculty and staff. I don't need to tell you what it was like to suddenly go to emergency mode. That meant that over 20,000 students and over 10,000 faculty and staff, essentially within a time frame of 3 or 4 days, had to completely change the way that they worked. For us, the goals in this transition were definitely the safety of students and faculty, compliance with Swiss federal guidelines that came out at the time. Then, and I put this in boldface, a very important priority was students do not lose a semester. And then we had to do, because of that, we had to switch the instructional mode across the whole institution within 1 week. Otherwise, we would have lost instructional time, and no, the students would not have been able to successfully complete the semester. We put a lot of responsibility with the instructors. We figured that the instructors know their courses best. So all that we could offer out of central administration was support by central services and then the departmental support staff that was in place. We extended the service and support lines times. We had a hotline going till deep in the night. And then we needed to, as quickly as possible, create legal security through emergency rules that were put out by the rectorate, how we would operate in this new mode. The result of that was, indeed, within a week, 95% of the courses were successfully transferred to the online realm in one way or another. The biggest problem were laboratory classes. And for laboratory classes, some of them had to be pushed into the summer or even into next semester. That was not always possible to transfer. If we are in normal operations, these are the different modes of instructions that we have. The most direct one, of course, is, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, we have a normal lecture hall, and you would have face-to-face classroom instruction, and you would directly talk and engage with the students. That, for our university, is the main mode of teaching. It is proud of being a face-to-face personal interaction university. And yes, this purple up here, that's our main mode of instruction. Sometimes the lecture halls are too small. If lecture halls are too small, then overflow space is created in another lecture hall. That meant we already had camera infrastructure in place in order to stream lectures to another lecture hall. So basically, students would sit elsewhere on campus, but they would be able to live see what's happening in one lecture hall. And that, of course, then had it in it that the students could also directly take that same live stream that was put into other lecture halls, and they could watch it at home or wherever they are. So we were sort of fortunate that that particular infrastructure was already in place. Several of these lectures were already recorded, so there was video storage capability in place, and then of course you could asynchronously watch those lectures essentially anytime. What we also had were course management infrastructure, this orange branch down here. So faculty would make available their lecture slides, their scripts, homework, quizzes, things like that. That is running through a course management system. And then when it comes to apps, those would be available in a lecture hall where you may have some sort of clicker question that you would ask of the students, but also at home. So there was also already a tradition in place of faculty making instructional materials and then through a course management system or some other application server that we have to make that available to the students inside the lecture home and at home. The mode of instruction we didn't have was video conferencing. The tool that we are using right now was never used in teaching to any large extent. Yes, there may have been the occasional seminar class that might have been run in video conferencing mode, particularly if you had colleagues from other institutions joining in. But this particular branch here, video conferencing, was something that we had not established as one of our modes of teaching. Well, then comes Corona, and the landscape, of course, can't really change, but the emphasis has to change. So comes Corona. Everything lecture hall is not available to us anymore. Essentially, we went from having on Monday classes like usual to Tuesday where nobody knew what to do, to Thursday where it said, okay, that's it. The university is in lockdown. The buildings are closed off and the instructional mode has to change. So these particular endpoints here, lecture halls were not available anymore. Faculty was still able to lecture in front of empty lecture halls. So some of the infrastructure with Blackboard recording and speaker recording was continued to be used. The faculty would essentially talk to an empty audience. That is very, very disconcerting. Imagine yourself standing in front of an empty classroom, but basically acting like you were giving a lecture. But nevertheless, that was possible. And then office was suddenly home office, and more faculty were teaching from home. And yes, at this point, this branch here became available, video conferencing. And video conferencing for us was Zoom. The university very quickly spent a lot of money on Zoom licenses so that they could host even very large classes over a large amount of times, 2 hours, in order to essentially map what would usually happen inside of a classroom in this new Corona setting here. So that was our new landscape. That's the thing we had to work with. Students were sitting at home. Faculty were in empty lecture halls or working from home. Video conferencing became the main tool, but we were at least fortunate enough we could do everything but face-to-face instruction. All of the other channels were still available to us. What could we do? So it turned out those hotlines, those extended support hours, all of these things that we had rapidly put into place, almost 24-hour hotline, that wasn't really used. So people, even in that weird mode, continued to work at their normal work hours where they were always working. Instead, we started focusing on putting resources in place. So we made resource pages here, options for remote teaching, working across the institution, pulling together resources, making options, putting together menus of what faculty can do. So we made these web pages here available to us, reduced support by phone and email to normal business hours, but that got a little busier than normal. We had virtual coffee breaks where faculty could exchange each other's experience about teaching online. We also started a weekly webinar series. We took an existing seminar series on teaching, turned it into a weekly webinar series on teaching. And so we had kind of according to a book title, we then had Teaching in the Time of Corona, and weekly faculty were presenting how they were struggling with different instructional challenges. Interesting sessions were with our partner university in Lausanne, where we essentially noticed we are all in the same boat. Other interesting sessions were of how faculty came up with ideas of doing laboratories after all, by having sort of home laboratories or field laboratories, having the students go out, collect data, or doing experiments with household equipment. There is a lot of creativity that went into moving the classes online in a very short amount of time. How did the students perceive that? So about 2 weeks into the new mode, we asked the students about their experience of what it was like to be in this new mode. And we looked at that by course. And usually we consider a course to be critical if the evaluation of the course on the average is lower than 3 points out of 5. And that's the normal criterion that we use for is a course critical or not. And we were just flabbergasted to see that only 17 out of 1,050 courses that we were offering at the time were rated by the students as not working for them. 1,034 courses, the students said that this new mode of teaching is working for them. The majority of students stated that remote teaching worked for them. We saw that. That they felt well informed how the continuation of the courses ensured via remote teaching, that they thought they were able to apply themselves to the material that was being offered online, that the available aids for remote teaching, the lecture notes, textbooks, videos were indeed helpful to them, and that exercises conducted via remote teaching were helping them to understand and apply lecture content. Exercises usually are problem-solving activities that are led by assistants. Very important part of teaching. So we were very happy to see that the majority of the students thought that these exercises still worked for them. However, we should take that with a grain of salt. This was a very exceptional semester. These were very exceptional circumstances. Many of the very positive evaluations by the students may have been sort of tainted by an appreciation of effort. So students saw how much effort the faculty put into this, how much effort the university put into this. And of course, then you are rating things highly that you may not rank quite as highly in normal operations. And we should certainly not expect that if we were doing another semester just like this one, that we would get the same positive evaluations. I think the moment that you do something like this, it turns from something that you appreciate as a surprise into something that you take for granted. And then I think the bar is going to be raised a lot of what students are going to expect from next semester of remote teaching, because, and rightfully so, students would expect that by that time we should have figured it out how it really works. Now comes the issue of exams. That for us was a big struggle. ETH has midterm exams that do usually not count for very much. Then they have sort of final exams. And we just finished, well, today is the last day of the final exam period. And then they have also very big high-stake exams that fortunately only happen in the fall. So we didn't need to touch those yet. But how are we running our midterm exams? How are we running our final exams? We made, as the rectorate, we made sort of a decision tree of how that's supposed to work. And those then were written down as emergency rules by the rectorate so that the faculty have legal security that this is actually the way it's supposed to be. So the first point in that decision tree was, is on-site presence absolutely necessary? And if that's the case, we have to move the exam to September. So there's no other way. That means we basically have to move the final exam into the same period where we usually have these high-stake exams. That's not desirable. The students are stressed out to begin with. The faculty are stressed out, and you don't want to have yet another exam that you have to take. But if there's really no other way to do the exam but to do it in person, then it has to be moved to September. That could be that you have to sort of a sample. Students might get a sample of some material, and they have to gauge what's going on with the material. It may be that they are supposed to conduct a small experiment and then write that down like a lab final exam. All of that is online very difficult. Next level down is, can the exam be switched to an oral exam? That was very desirable for us. If it's a small class, instead of giving an exam to 20 students, it may actually be easier to do 20 oral exams. We explicitly allowed it to switch from a written to an oral exam. That oral exam would then be conducted with Zoom, just like we are using here right now. And there were some regulations about it, about a witness being in the same Zoom room and the student being visible at all times. But nevertheless, that was a preferred way for small classes, is that you turn the written exam into an oral Zoom-based exam. If that's not possible, you look into should that exam still be done on paper, but the students are being supervised via Zoom. So the idea there was that shortly before the exam starts, the PDF for the exam would be made available in Zoom, and then either the students watch it on the screen or they print it. And then you would basically sit there like you would sit in a lecture hall. We would use Zoom breakout groups so that one teaching assistant has to supervise 5 or 6 students in breakout rooms. And the students basically would have to sit in a way that you could kind of see what they're working on. And, well, I have to be further away. but that you could actually see where they are, could see their surroundings, but they would still do a written exam. Then after the written exam is over, the students would take their phone, scan the exam. We made a free scanner app available. So the students would scan the exam and then email it. And they would scan it while still being online, while still being watched, so that they couldn't modify the exam anymore after the exam period is over. That's a very cumbersome operation, but it actually, to our own surprise, worked out quite well. Then we do currently at ETH have online exams, which is sort of a misnomer, but basically what it means is that the students have to go to a computer lab and they are taking the exams in a computer lab. That actually, interestingly enough, turned out to be one of our biggest challenges, moving an online exam remote, because we usually have a very, very tightly controlled environment for the online exams. And you couldn't do that anymore if the students are at home using their own machines. So what we then said, okay, if you have currently an online exam, can you switch the questions to an open format? The idea is to not have options A, B, C, D, or have some normal mix and match where the students using other communication channels could easily exchange answers with each other, but to use more open-ended, more free-form answers where you could actually do something like a normal plagiarism check to see if the answers are just way too similar with each other. So we said, if you do that, can you do it open-ended? So the students actually have to type something using their own words. And we would find that an appropriate way of doing that. We also encouraged faculty to make those exams open book, open notes, so that essentially the students would be allowed to use the web. Can't do that with knowledge exams, but you can do that with conceptual exams. Or they could have their book open. Yeah, if that is not possible, if it has to stay multiple choice A, B, C, D, then we said it has to be randomized. And you heard the talk by Professor Bauer, I think last week or 2 weeks ago or something like that, what it looks like to have questions randomized, so that different students have different versions of the same problem. And we thought also that would be an appropriate way of cutting down on ability to cheat. And what we also said in that scenario is the students should have just enough time to get through the exam. You don't give them spare time. You just give them exactly enough time to make it through the exam if you know what you're doing. But don't give them so much time that they could come up with new creative ways of exchanging answers with each other. So that's essentially how we then decided to do the exams. Today's the last day of the final exams. So far, so good. Here in Switzerland, we still have 2 hours to go. In those 2 hours, we could still have a major disaster, but hoping that nothing more major happens within the next 2 hours, I think we can claim that we survived final exams. So far, the grades that we got out of these exams seem to be extremely comparable to other semesters. And we have also got no student complaints beyond the normal complaints that you get anyway when you give exams. So it's, well, so far so good. 2 more hours to go. And then we have survived the final exams, I hope. Evaluation of faculty. So the semester, except for final exams, the semester is over. We asked the faculty, how did you perceive this? We had asked the students early on, and then at the end of the semester, we asked the faculty. We got a 61% return rate, on the faculty evaluations of the semester. That's fairly remarkable. Faculty usually don't read their email. And so, yes, we got that hot off the press. The majority of faculty stated that they succeeded in getting through the materials, that they were dropping very little content, and that they were having high attendance in the lecture halls, the virtual lecture halls, so that's good. Many faculty members, however, also stated that they struggled with getting feedback from the students, keeping in touch with the students, doing laboratory and data analysis exercises, we knew that, and that they struggled with achieving their educational goals. And that might give you pause for a second, because the majority of faculty also said that they were able to get through the materials. We should remember, though, that content coverage and educational goals are two different things. You may have a lot of hidden curriculum in a course that you are teaching, ways of thinking, ways of problem solving, things like that. So yes, people were able to get through the materials and the content, but several faculty stated that still they do not feel satisfied about having achieved their educational goals the way that they would usually be able to accomplish their tasks there. We had lots of free-form comments, 90 pages of free-form comments. I can't repeat any of that here in a public talk, but here's a little word cloud. So I was very delighted that when we ran a word cloud algorithm over the written examples, the single biggest thing that stood out was students. I'd love to see that. Students are still at the center of the things, and the most frequently used word in faculty written comments was students. But yeah, the next one down is Zoom and teaching. And then somewhere here's Moodle, which is the system that's usually used. Lecture is fairly prominent, but then you see the whole slew. Or here's single student, presentations, learning, remote. So it's kind of interesting, but I'm still delighted that students are in the center of the whole thing. Okay, fall semester is upon us. We still don't know exactly what's gonna come. We don't know how this global pandemic is gonna develop. At the moment, things in Switzerland look fairly good, but that's not yet time for us to say, okay, it's over. We don't know if there's a second wave. We don't know how this, well, we just don't know how this is developing. The currently active guideline by the government is that in permanent meetings without any additional security measures, without any contact tracing in place, people have to be 2 meters apart. And we thought, that's easy. Let's just overlay our lecture hall with 1 meter radius circles and see how tightly we can pack the students, thinking that maybe we would get something like half or something like a quarter. Turns out, in reality, it means that it's 1/5 or even only 1/6 of the normal lecture hall capacity if a 2 meter rule is held in place. So if we have to continue operating with 2 meters distance between people, then we have to basically stay online. We simply don't have enough rooms at the university to do any kind of significant face-to-face teaching. We hope that there's going to be additional clarification by the federal government here in Switzerland of how to apply the rule, if we can do additional safety measures like masks, if we can do additional contact tracing, or if we are very good with ventilation. We currently are measuring airflow in the lecture halls to get exact values on the ventilation that we have in all the places. So we hope that there's going to be some more clarification by federal government well before the fall semester starts, because people need to somehow arrange what they do next semester, and we don't want another surprise. We hope that somehow we can get everything to a 50% capacity every other seat taken. We would very strongly prioritize small exercise sessions, problem-solving sessions, and laboratory courses for obvious reasons. And then we're going to work with the leftover room capacity after we have prioritized those things. We also would like to do a lot for our first-year students who have never really been on a campus. So what we try to establish there is what we currently internally call bubbles, which are fixed student groups across courses. And that's still basically possible because all of these students are also in one major basically taking all the same courses. So you can't say that you are together with Susie, Fred, Paul, and Rebecca, and that particular bubble of students is moving through the lectures together and through the labs and through the exercise sessions, and that maybe then we can increase the student density because we can then actually do contact tracing. We will probably continue to have the very large lectures online. We might even go down to 100 and consider a lecture with 100 students to be large just because of the limited room capacity that we have. But nobody really knows what's going to happen in the fall. So when it comes to looking into the future, it's actually a little bit safer to look into the far future than next semester, which is still very much in limbo. So we asked faculty, after Corona is over, which of these things will you still continue doing? One of the first things we heard is, please don't confuse emergency solutions, pragmatic emergency solutions, with long-term strategy. Just because we somehow made it work, and we somehow made it work remarkably well, doesn't mean that we have a strategy in place for online teaching. We are a very traditional face-to-face university. So yes, Corona opened minds and horizons for blended and flipped classroom scenarios, but we still we are not considering becoming an online university. In a survey, the majority of faculty stated that after Corona, whenever that is, they will discontinue live streaming of lectures and video conferences, and that they would like the personal interaction again with the students. That's understandable. Actually, the notion was, we miss the students. We actually really miss the students. But they plan to continue making self-recorded lessons where you would sit at home and talk through a presentation or problem solving using tools like Camtasia. You make those little instructional videos. Many faculty said that they plan on continuing making those little snippets of video. And they also want to continue making their learning resources, the scripts, the worksheets, and so on available online with the course management systems. So yes, return to face-to-face teaching plus additional components. We think about what we should do to make that happen. And one of the things is, I think we need a much better way of managing our learning content. In a short amount of time, we created a lot of online learning content, some of them not so good, particularly during the first week, some of the stuff very good. We need a better way of managing that, cataloging that. We are currently trying to collect all of the videos that have been generated this semester, and we are essentially failing at it. The stuff is just everywhere. A lot of it is in our video servers at our university. Other stuff is in the Zoom cloud. Other stuff is in YouTube. So things are very, very distributed. If we want to have a sustainable and more resilient infrastructure, then we need a way of managing this content a little bit better and putting it to use directly in the classroom without some complicated uploading, downloading mechanism in the middle of it. So under the working title of Open LCMS, Open Learning Content Management, we think about having a much better structure for managing this content here that's sitting down here. And yes, course materials are presentations, are online homework, online questions, movies, data, documents, scripts, all of these things that I think for a long-term strategy you need just to get a better handle on. We don't see a dichotomy. We think it's completely false to think that you have two choices, that you could either do face-to-face or online. And yes, we have been forced into this online mode here, into this black mode this semester. But the future we see as much more scales of gray, where we use the technology where it comes naturally and where it makes sense. And those are blended scenarios, those are flipped scenarios in which part of what you do is online, part of what you do is in the classroom. And yes, that's been the mantra for many, many years. But the idea is that if you have the privilege of seeing each other face to face, that face-to-face time is actually precious. And if we realized anything during Corona, it's how precious it is to be able to interact face-to-face. And so the idea is we use that lecture time for much more productive things than just giving a sermon. You can give a sermon online. The classroom time is for interaction. Make use of the fact that you are actually together in the same room at the same time. So yeah, little wake-up call for us. Let's see what happens. So here's just my contact. But that's basically my prepared remarks. And I would be very, very glad if there are questions or discussions.
Oh, very, very nice, Gerd. I think that with your presentation, we see that your institution have no problem to do this transition from online. I think that you, in fact, have prepared many other tools before, or only face-to-face before the pandemic in your institution. It's not clear for me.
So yes, I mean, many of these things were somehow in place. They were not used very extensively, but the infrastructure that we did have in place, let's just look at that. So this infrastructure was in place. All of these, the live video streams were in place. And they were already being routed to individual students. Mm-hmm. We got rid of this here. We couldn't do that anymore, but we could continue doing this. The video recording infrastructures, cameras in the classroom, equipment to record the blackboards, that was in place. And we always had it that the students could watch it. Course management services were in place. So they weren't used as much as we wished they would be used, but they were already there. And in addition, we are very fortunate that Switzerland is a tiny country, but the infrastructure in terms of networking coverage is excellent. So yeah, I mean, it's the birthplace of the web. So essentially we were able in a very small country to profit from excellent coverage of even the most remote corners of this tiny country, in spite of the fact that there are some mountains standing around and standing in the way. It was easier than if you have a huge country that you have to deal with.
The problem of the laboratory, how the plans for your institution for the future, because you said that we don't know when this pandemic is finished, and also is a possibility to have a second wave also.
Yes.
Nobody knows. So this part of laboratory, your institution is developed something to do something online.
Not really. So we thought a lot about that. And yes, people were coming up with good creative solutions to have labs somehow. So people were using cellular phones, which are full of sensors. Smartphones have many, many sensors. So they were using that. They were using household equipment. They were collecting data on location and then sending the raw data to the students in order to be analyzed from home. An electronics class was mailing the components to all of the students. So they would have the electronics components that they usually would do lab with. They got them in the mail as a little parcel. But then we thought, okay, what's next? We had played around with virtual laboratories. We had played around with three-dimensional, more or less immersive scenarios for lab. We just weren't satisfied with it. And the reason for that is maybe kind of ridiculous, but not enough things could go wrong. We kind of believe that part of student lab is making mistakes. Part of it is imperfect equipment. Part of it is a connection comes loose somewhere. And you have to somehow figure out where is that loose wire. Part of it is you have to cool an apparatus. And as you cool the apparatus, it shrinks. Things become brittle. And suddenly you don't have contact anymore for something. Like all the things that could go wrong. And then using a piece of duct tape to make it work. Or getting a soldering iron and soldering it back together. Those things are things that we want our students to know and to be able to do. We want our students to improvise. We want our students to problem solve. We want our students to have tactile ability. We have found no replacement for that in the online realm. And so at some point, we more or less gave up trying and said, okay, it just ain't gonna work online. If Corona continues like it does, then we might have the students come in for a week to do a very intense laboratory class. So basically do all of the laboratory in one week and have cohorts moving through. But we just haven't found a way for us that would fulfill the exact same instructional objectives that a real life laboratory would do. So, yeah. I mean, that's not to say that other solutions are really bad. And yes, you can do a lot of interesting stuff online. You can do online experiment. That's all good. That's far, far better than nothing. But we just don't want to turn that into a permanent strategy.
Well, you said that the faculty people, when you ask it, they want to return it to face-to-face. You
Yes.
think that the faculty have why this decision to return? The people don't believe that the online education is comparative. You know, they think that like you said about the laboratory, that you don't have this possibility to comparison. But in the case of the online, why this position of the faculty?
I think that is more coming from the feel of the faculty, and I think at some level it's almost emotional. faculty said that when they lecture, and I mean, you have that experience, probably I have the experience, everyone who lectures has the experience, you look at the audience and you try to figure out how do they feel at the moment. You might see a lot of puzzled looks. People look puzzled, confused. You know something went wrong. You hear that the noise level in the lecture hall goes up because people start talking to their neighbor. Yeah, something's wrong. You see happy students. You want to see that. You get questions. Somebody says, here, what's with this? What, do you really mean that? You make a joke and you would like to know if somebody laughs. So the problem is, I think, for the faculty who at some level, and I don't want to downgrade this, I've done my share of it myself, at some level as faculty you are also a performing artist, and it's very hard to do that without an audience for many, many reasons. There is a connection that you have with the audience, you somehow play with the lecture hall, it's organic, and people said talking into a laptop, they just don't get the kind of feedback that they need in order to give a good lecture. And so that is, I think, not necessarily driven by that it wouldn't work to give a lecture online. It just doesn't work for the faculty. And I mean, some of them just also flat out said, I am missing the students. And one should think about that for a moment. Why have people chosen the profession of being a professor? At some point, you love teaching. Probably otherwise you have taken another job. So you love teaching young people. And then those people are suddenly gone. And I think that's also something that faculty just said, I want that back. I'm missing part of my professional life. Mm-hmm. So I think the motivation there is very, very different. It's not the laboratory, it's just not working the same way because of the material, the content, what you wanted, because of your educational goals. I think for the lecture, it's just not feeling right. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of the feel that I got out of the faculty feedback. It just doesn't feel right.
And in the case of Michigan State, you have many courses that, for example, the basic physics, the student can do the online or the presential. In your institution, they have this option also or not?
No. So that is, I think, kind of a different approach between the North American universities and the European universities. I don't think that ETH Zurich is ever going to offer a completely online physics course. It just doesn't seem to fit into the culture over here. I'm not talking about right or wrong. I'm not talking about if it can work or not. I think those online courses work just fine, but I'm talking about ingrained culture. It's also a smaller university. ETH is less than half the size of Michigan State University and has a very high faculty ratio. So it prides itself in having face-to-face instruction up to the level you were talking about the physics courses. The courses that are online at Michigan State are the first year physics courses. The requirement at ETH is that every single first year lecture course is read by a senior full professor. So actually there are requirements for the academic standing of the lecturer for the introductory, the bread and butter Newtonian physics courses. Senior full professor, because they say that's the first impression that the students are getting of university and it better be good. It's just a cultural difference. And I'm also not subscribing to the fact that every senior full professor is necessarily good. but that's the way that the culture here is working.
And your institution, the students pay for the course or not? Or is completely free?
It's nominal fee. So it's just some sort of administrative fee, and it escapes me. But off the top of my head, I would say a semester costs about $300. And the $300 are basically administrative fees, and I think also a little bit of a barrier that somebody just frivolously enrolls and then never does anything. So I think it's also supposed to be like a little threshold, so that you don't just enroll and then don't do a thing. So essentially, yes, education is free in Switzerland.
And in this transition, the students that stay at home, some of these students have a problem with the connection or the equipments or not. So you don't have a problem for this situation of students that they go for home.
It was to a very, very large degree fine. There were some problems. The problems were that for some of the students, they are in a bigger family with several siblings, and suddenly all of them had online lectures and all of them were video streaming. So you had the high school kid video streaming, you had the university student, the other university, all of them video streaming at the same time. So then they were actually getting into each other's way. So at some point, even a gigabit connection is not good enough anymore. Then the next problem that we utterly hadn't expected is students say, I don't have a quiet place at home to work, because everyone's home. Like everyone's doing home office. Sorry, I forgot also the parents. So the parents are doing home office with video. The siblings are all attending some sort of education with video. And then this particular student has to sit down and write an exam. There's just not enough quiet rooms in the house where they can work. So they said, apartments are small. I don't have a quiet space to work. Then I talked about these paper-based exams, and we thought, yep, you get that thing in the mail, you print it out. And you wouldn't believe the flood of emails we got from students saying, we don't own a printer. Well, why don't you own a printer? We can print at the university for free. So essentially, it always used to be that if you needed to print something as a student, you had an unlimited print budget. So you just go and print it on a university printer. Why would you buy your own printer? And then suddenly they said, yep, you need to print this out. Well, I don't have a printer. And they couldn't go on campus to print it out because all the buildings were locked. So those little things came to haunt us. No, it wasn't. It was not without problems. But I mean, a global pandemic, things will go wrong. There will be problems. I think what is and what's probably true for your university, what's true for all the people who are listening at the moment, is people have become very pragmatic, and people have also moved together and just made things work, even if they were imperfect. I think at least now, over the past months, there was a general attitude of just let's just make it work. And that was among faculty, that was faculty and students, that was among students. You just somehow make it work, even if it's less than perfect. And probably you have the same experience at your university. You just somehow have to make it work, even if it's less than perfect.
Yes, another question about the Zoom that you choose for all this interaction between faculty and the students. Why you choose Zoom? They have because some months ago they said that had some problem of security.
Yeah.
Why you decided for the Zoom?
Several reasons. The one of them is that while Switzerland has a free university video conferencing system, it was never designed for the workload that would happen if tens and tens of thousands of students would suddenly go online. By now, it may be fine doing that, but come a week where suddenly you go from the occasional video conference to having to stream thousands and thousands of lectures to tens of thousands of people, we just didn't deem that thing ready for prime time. Then the university is working with Microsoft Teams, which has video conferencing in it, but we weren't quite there yet either. That wasn't a turnkey solution at the time. Zoom just promised, and it actually kept the promise, to be scalable enough to handle our workload, and it did. We looked at the thousands of sessions that were suddenly originating across campus. All of the business meetings, rectorate, school, everything went over Zoom suddenly. It kept up with the workload. It was amazing. But then, of course, you mentioned security concerns, privacy concerns. And in Switzerland, that's very high on the agenda. So we looked at where are the data streams going. And when we started out, 80% of the data streams were staying within Europe. 20% of the data streams were going through the United States. And I can say it as a US citizen, I can say Switzerland has a beef with the United States of America and some of the ways that the national agencies and the kind of access that national agencies have to cloud data. So they said this cannot be a permanent solution. We cannot route 20% of the calls through US American servers. So in the meantime, fortunately, Zoom has moved. So last I checked, encryption protocols were being improved. Also, more of the data centers, I don't know if we are yet at 100%, but at least a lot more of the streams are being routed through European servers. And at the current time, there's no negotiations to have all video streams out of ETH go through Swiss servers so that we even stay within our own country here. If Zoom keeps moving in that direction, I think it may be a tool that's going to be there to stay for our university. If Zoom doesn't complete this privacy transition, and also that all the user agreements are now being routed through Swiss law. If all of that happens, Swiss servers, all the user agreements being anchored in Swiss law, it may be a tool that's here to stay. If that's not happening, the current data security ruling is that once that Corona is over, Zoom goes away. It's being accepted as an emergency solution, but not as a permanent one unless it starts having full compliance. And that one we are still waiting on. I would hate to lose Zoom because it's by far the nicest video conferencing tool I've ever seen and experienced. But yeah, we need to see how that develops.
Well, we have 1 hour, but to finish, I would like that you can say, how is the pandemic in Switzerland? How is the situation at this moment?
Well, it's relaxing, apparently. I'm carefully using the word apparently. So yesterday there were 24 confirmed new infections. There hasn't been a death that is connected with Corona in quite a while. The thing is, the Swiss people seem to return to life as normal. and that's dangerous. So if you now go downtown Zurich, the sun is out, it's wonderful weather, and it's probably going to look like any other summer day in Zurich. Yes, there are still lines in front of the supermarket because they have little taped off things where you are supposed to stand 2 meters apart, and they have counters, how many people can be in the store at the same time. In the banks, everywhere, every place of business has restrictions. Restaurants have plexiglass between the tables. Areas and seats of restaurants are taped off. So all the places of business have distance rules and security measures in place. The moment you go out on the street, it's just flow of pedestrians like normal. And yes, there is a significant danger of a second wave. A recent study looks like 5% of the population have antibodies. So 5% of the population have gone through Corona and survived. But that leaves 95% of the population who do not have antibodies. And so, yeah, people are sick of being quarantined. People are sick of not being able to go out, and that is dangerous.
Yes, the final question: how was the economic impact in Switzerland with this pandemic? How
we don't know yet.
No.
We do not know yet. For a while, federal government has been bleeding money. Many of the small businesses got basically no question asked credit in order to bridge the time. So if you were a small business owner, you could essentially go to any business bank and get a loan for up to $500,000 without any questions asked to bridge you over. So if you go out on the street, there aren't closed businesses. They all survived. Are they going to be able to pay back those loans, and how long is it going to take? We don't know. As a federal university, we depend to a large degree on federal funds. We don't know what next year's budget is going to look like. At the same time, I looked at export values of Switzerland. It's still doing excellent. It has a very stable, very resilient economy. And we have to see, the starting point is good. We have to see if this stable, resilient economy, how much of a dent it's going to take from this pandemic here. I think it's going to be noticeable. But nobody's currently in a complete crisis mode. So just to turn that around, most people think, well, shoot, global pandemic, what do you expect? But I don't see any. Yes, it's going to be lean years, but not terrible years ahead.
Okay, Gerd, thank you so very much for your talk. That is really very important to see how is, because we have done a web seminar with Wolfgang that I said, this American and Europe are systems that have different traditions. So
yes.
For us, it's very important to see the two sides, and you explain very well the situation in one very important, because this was the Einstein University, that have done his study. So I will finish. So I would like to pass for you to do the final consideration before we finish this talk, please.
Thank you again for inviting me here. I very much appreciated the opportunity to talk to you. I really hope that we can talk face to face again sometime in the not too distant future. I always very much enjoy being at the University of Sao Paulo, so I hope that it's going to be in person again. I'm wishing you, of course, the very best. Stay healthy, and everyone here. And it's going to be over. So we're going to get beyond this, and higher education is going to get beyond this. And I think we're going to come out of this with a new open mind and with a new sense of opportunity and chances. So thank you for the ability to share some of those with you today. So I hope to see you in person in the not too distant future.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we have another possibility, perhaps in the next future, to or face, as you said. Thank you very much, Gerd.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye.